"You were useful, while no one knew a woman designed it," the Duke told his wife. "Now you have become an embarrassment." Adrian locked Josephine out of her drafting room and announced that he would open the Ashbourne Railway without her. The humiliation cost her more than recognition. Every patent had been registered under his title. Every engineer now answered to Sir Malcolm Vale, and newspapers called her a resentful wife seeking credit for her husband's genius. But Josephine had designed the Western Bridge to sing. Under heavy strain, its iron cables produced a low, steady vibration. 3 nights after her dismissal, she stood beneath the structure and heard a sharp discord trembling through the fog. Someone had removed 2 internal braces and concealed the gaps behind decorative panels. The inaugural train would cross in 12 days, carrying members of Parliament and 40 schoolchildren. Then Josephine saw Adrian's signature on the order authorizing the alteration. For several seconds, she could only stare at it. The paper had been nailed inside the inspection hut, half covered by a schedule of night shifts. At the bottom, beneath Sir Malcolm Vale's instructions to replace the original lattice braces with lighter ornamental supports, stood Adrian's unmistakable hand. Ashbourne. Approved. Josephine lifted the lantern closer. The flame trembled behind the glass, throwing gold across the rain-damp page. Adrian's signature slanted upward at the end, as it always did when he signed in haste. It was not a clerk's imitation. She had watched him write that name upon their marriage register, their first mortgage agreement, and the deed that transferred her father's ironworks into the Ashbourne estate. He had known. A boot scraped against gravel outside. Josephine extinguished the lantern and pressed herself behind a stack of timber. Through a narrow gap, she saw 2 men enter the construction yard. The first wore a foreman's rough coat. The second carried an ivory-handled cane that had never touched a day's labor. "Sir Malcolm Vale." The Duchess was seen near the eastern gate, the foreman whispered. Malcolm stopped beneath the inspection notice. "Then the eastern watchman will be dismissed before dawn. She knows the bridge better than anyone. That is why no one must believe her." Josephine held her breath. Malcolm's silver cane tapped once against the hut wall. "The newspapers have already done their work," he continued. "A neglected wife, a jealous woman, an amateur claiming her husband's achievement. If she raises an alarm now, society will call it revenge. And if she finds the missing braces?" Malcolm's voice hardened. "The bridge must remain untouched until opening day. Afterward, there will be nothing left to inspect." The cold that entered Josephine's body had nothing to do with the fog. Nothing left to inspect. Not a structural failure caused by greed, then. Not merely cheaper iron hidden behind Adrian's authority. Malcolm expected the bridge to collapse so completely that the evidence would disappear beneath the river. With ministers, investors, railway workers, and 40 children aboard the inaugural train. The men moved toward the western stairs. Josephine waited until their lantern vanished above the girders, then slipped from concealment and tore Adrian's authorization from the wall. She folded it twice and pushed it inside the lining of her glove. A hand closed around her wrist. She turned sharply, raising the darkened lantern as a weapon. "Your Grace, don't." The man released her at once. Thomas Reed, the youngest engineer on her former team, stood before her with a split lip and dried blood along his collar. "Mr. Reed? They dismissed me yesterday." His eyes darted toward the bridge. "I refuse to certify Vale's replacement iron." Josephine touched the swelling beneath his eye. "Who did this? It does not matter. It matters to me." For an instant, grief crossed his face. She had trained Thomas from the time he was an apprentice unable to afford proper instruments. He had once told her that she was the first person who had judged his calculations before judging his father's occupation. "They made every engineer sign a new declaration," he said. "It states that you designed the defective sections alone. If the bridge fails, they will claim His Grace dismissed you after discovering your errors." Josephine felt Adrian's authorization against her palm. "My husband approved the alterations." "Then keep that order safe. It may be the only proof that survives." A whistle sounded from the upper platform. Thomas seized her shoulders and pushed her behind the timber just as a lantern beam swept across the yard. Men began descending the iron stairs. "There's a maintenance tunnel beneath the northern abutment," he whispered. "Go now. Come with me. I'll delay them. You have already been beaten for defending my work, and 40 children will be on that train." The whistle sounded again, closer this time. Josephine caught his sleeve. "Meet me tomorrow at St. Agnes School. Bring every drawing or inspection record you can recover. Tell no one, not even the engineers who once served under me." Thomas nodded and ran toward the eastern scaffolding, deliberately kicking over a bucket of bolts. The crash drew shouts and lanterns away from Josephine. She gathered her skirt and hurried toward the riverbank. Mud pulled at her boots as she descended beneath the stone abutment. The entrance to the maintenance tunnel was almost invisible behind coils of discarded rope. Inside, the darkness smelled of wet limestone and rust. Josephine had taken no more than 12 steps when she heard a faint ticking beneath the bridge. Not the cooling of iron, not water dripping from the masonry, a clockwork mechanism. She crouched, struck a match, and saw a copper wire running along the tunnel wall toward the central support. Someone had drilled into the stone and packed the opening with black powder. The bridge had not merely been weakened, it had been prepared to explode. Behind her, a man's voice echoed through the tunnel. "Your Grace, step away from the wall." Josephine turned. At the entrance stood her husband, holding a pistol. Josephine did not move. The match burned toward her fingers, illuminating Adrian's face in brief, wavering fragments. His evening coat was unbuttoned, his boots streaked with mud, and the pistol in his right hand was aimed past her shoulder rather than at her heart. "Put out the flame," he said. She dropped the match and crushed it beneath her boot. Darkness swallowed the copper wire, but she could still hear the mechanism ticking inside the wall. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I might ask the same of you. You dismissed me from the railway. You did not forbid me from walking beside the river. You are beneath the bridge at midnight with an unauthorized engineer and a stolen inspection order." Josephine's breath tightened. "You saw Thomas. I saw him running from my guards. And naturally you assumed I was the criminal." "I assumed nothing. Step away from the wall." She moved carefully toward him. Adrian lowered the pistol only after she passed the drilled opening. "There is black powder inside that support," she said. "The copper wire runs toward a clockwork trigger. I know what black powder looks like." "Then look." "I intend to, once you are safely outside." The words might once have sounded protective. Now they felt almost insulting. Josephine remained between him and the tunnel entrance. "Did Sir Malcolm tell you to follow me?" Adrian's expression changed by less than an inch, but she knew the answer. "He warned me that you might attempt to damage the bridge," he said. A bitter laugh escaped her. "And you believed him. You threatened to stop the opening. I threatened to stop a train from crossing an unsafe structure. You threatened me before 6 members of the railway committee. Because you stood before those men and called my calculations yours." His jaw hardened. "This is neither the place nor the hour to reopen that argument. No. This is the place where your argument ends." She pulled the authorization from her glove and held it before him. Adrian took it with his free hand. Though the tunnel was dark, he did not need light to recognize his signature. "You approved the removal of my braces," she said. "You replaced them with decorative supports that cannot bear half the required load. I authorized Vale to reduce unnecessary weight. Those braces were not unnecessary." He showed me a report signed by 3 engineers who answer to him. "And every objection leads back to your wounded pride." Josephine stared at the man she had married 9 years earlier. Adrian had once sat beside her until dawn while she calculated the load capacity of their first viaduct. He had sharpened her pencils, brought her tea, and listened as she explained why iron behaved differently in winter. But admiration had soured when investors began asking for the mind behind the Ashbourne Railway. He wanted her brilliance when it served him privately, and resented it the moment the world might applaud her. "I warned you," she said quietly. You chose not to listen. And now black powder appears inside the bridge days after I removed you. The accusation hung between them. Josephine felt something inside her become still. You think I placed it here. I think you are desperate to prove that the railway cannot survive without you. And would I murder 40 children to make that point? Adrian looked away first. That single movement wounded her more deeply than an answer. The ticking suddenly accelerated. Josephine turned toward the wall. We must leave. A spark flashed inside the drilled opening. She seized Adrian's coat and dragged him toward the entrance. They had taken only 3 steps when a muffled blast struck behind them. Stone fragments tore through the darkness. Adrian threw himself over Josephine as the tunnel filled with dust and the ceiling groaned above their heads. A larger explosion did not follow. When the rumbling ceased, Josephine pushed against his chest. Get off me. Adrian rose slowly. Blood ran from a cut near his temple, but he appeared steady. Behind them, part of the tunnel wall had collapsed, burying the mechanism and copper wire beneath broken stone. It was a small charge, Josephine said through the dust, designed to destroy the evidence, not the bridge. Adrian touched the blood at his temple. Convenient. She could scarcely believe him. You saw the wire. I saw what you wanted me to see. You would rather accuse your wife than admit Malcolm Vale deceived you. I will not condemn a man on your word alone, but you condemned me on his. Footsteps approached from outside. Several guards entered carrying lanterns, followed by Sir Malcolm. His gaze moved first to Adrian's injury, then to Josephine, then to the collapsed wall. His surprise was perfectly measured. Your Grace, Malcolm said, thank God you are alive. You knew we were here? Josephine asked. The night watch reported an intruder beneath the bridge. He looked at Adrian. I feared she might attempt precisely this. She found powder in the wall, Adrian said. Malcolm's brows lifted. Did she? Josephine heard the doubt he placed inside those 2 words. Search the rubble, she ordered the guards. You will find fragments of copper wire and a clockwork trigger. No one moved. Malcolm gave her a sorrowful look. The Duchess no longer possesses authority here. Adrian still held the authorization. Josephine pointed to it. That order proves the bridge was altered. Malcolm took the paper before she could stop him. This order? He carried it to the lantern and examined the signature. How extraordinary. He turned the page over. On the reverse side, written in Josephine's own hand, were detailed instructions for removing the western braces. Her blood went cold. I never wrote that. Malcolm passed the document to Adrian. Your wife's handwriting is distinctive. Josephine read the lines over Adrian's shoulder. Every curve resembled hers. Every technical term had been chosen correctly. Beneath the instructions appeared a date from 6 months earlier, and her initials. Malcolm faced the guards. Search Her Grace. One of the men hesitated, but Adrian gave a grim nod. Josephine stepped back. Do not touch me. A guard reached for her coat. She struck his hand away, but another seized her arms. From the inner pocket of her cloak, he withdrew a small brass key and placed it in Malcolm's palm. Malcolm smiled. That is not mine, Josephine said. I believe, he replied. It opens the explosives cabinet at the Ashbourne Ironworks. Adrian stared at the key, his face empty of every memory they had ever shared. Then Malcolm delivered the final blow. Your Grace, 1 hour ago, Thomas Reed was found dead beside that cabinet. Josephine stopped struggling. What did you do to him? Malcolm's expression remained composed. I did nothing. Mr. Reed was discovered with a fractured skull and the explosives cabinet open beside him. He was alive less than half an hour ago. Then you were among the last people to see him. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Josephine understood what Malcolm intended. The key in her pocket, the instructions in her handwriting, Thomas's body, and the damaged tunnel formed a chain neat enough to satisfy any magistrate who preferred a duchess's scandal to an inconvenient investigation. Take me to him, she said. That would contaminate the scene, Malcolm replied. I was not speaking to you. She looked directly at Adrian. If Thomas is dead, let me see his body. Adrian folded the forged order and placed it inside his coat. You will return to Ashbourne Hall. So you can keep me silent until the bridge opens? So I can prevent another death, then close the railway? No. The answer came without hesitation. Josephine searched his face for uncertainty and found only the same wounded pride that had governed every decision since Parliament praised the Ashbourne project. Closing the line would mean admitting that his celebrated triumph was unsafe. It would delay the royal investment, frighten shareholders, and place his judgment beneath public scrutiny. The Western Bridge may collapse, she said. You heard the damaged cables. You saw the powder. I saw a small charge destroy the evidence moments after you entered the tunnel, because Malcolm knew I had found it. Malcolm gave Adrian a restrained, almost pitying glance. Your Grace, grief has made the Duchess reckless. She has lost the work that gave her life meaning. You stole that work, Josephine said. Adrian stepped between them. Enough. No, Adrian, not enough. It will never be enough until you admit what you did. His eyes flashed. Take her home. The guards led Josephine from the tunnel. She did not resist. Resistance would become another line in Malcolm's account of a hysterical wife. Instead, she counted the men stationed around the bridge, observed the route of the night patrol, and watched Malcolm slip the brass key into his waistcoat. A closed carriage waited beyond the eastern gate. Adrian entered opposite her, while 2 guards rode outside. The door shut, sealing them together in the narrow darkness. For several minutes, only the wheels spoke. Did you kill Thomas? Adrian finally asked. Josephine looked out at the passing hedgerows. If you can ask me that, there is nothing left between us worth answering for. I saw the key. It was planted in my cloak. And the instructions? Forged. The signature was exact. So was the report that gave you permission to erase my name. His face tightened. This railway carries the Ashbourne title. It could never have been presented as the work of my wife. Why? Because I am a woman? Because investors do not entrust their fortunes to women. They entrusted their fortunes to my calculations. You merely concealed who made them. I secured the land, the parliamentary approval, and the capital. And I made certain your trains would not fall into rivers. Adrian turned toward the window. Sir Malcolm says you intend to leave me after publicly claiming the railway. Josephine studied him. There it was, the private fear beneath his cruelty. Not that she had failed, but that she might succeed without him. Malcolm told you that? He showed me letters between you and a solicitor. I consulted a solicitor after you transferred my father's ironworks into Vale's control. You were planning a legal separation. I was protecting the school and the workers' pensions. You hid it from me. You signed away my inheritance without looking me in the eye. The carriage slowed at the gates of Ashbourne Hall. Lamps burned in every window, though dawn remained hours away. When Josephine stepped down, the housekeeper, Mrs. Bell, waited beneath the portico with 2 footmen. Adrian addressed her as though Josephine were not standing beside him. Her Grace is confined to the East Apartments. Remove all writing materials, tools, keys, and correspondence. No visitor is to see her without my permission. Mrs. Bell's face paled. Your Grace, do it. Josephine climbed the stairs without offering Adrian the satisfaction of protest. At the East Apartments, a maid searched her clothing, while Mrs. Bell watched with lowered eyes. They removed her hairpins, purse, gloves, and even the whalebone stays from her drafting sleeve. When they were finally alone, Mrs. Bell locked the door from inside. I am sorry, she whispered. Did Thomas come here tonight? The housekeeper's eyes lifted sharply. He arrived shortly before midnight. Josephine continued. What did he leave? Mrs. Bell crossed to the fireplace and removed a loose brick. From the hollow behind it, she drew a narrow metal cylinder no longer than her palm. He said it must reach you if he failed to return. Josephine twisted the cap. Inside lay a strip of tracing paper, covered in columns of numbers and 3 initials repeated beside every payment. MV, HC, and AA. What are they? Mrs. Bell asked. Payments for iron shipments. Josephine followed the dates with her fingertip. But these quantities are impossible. Vale charged the railway for 6,000 tons more iron than we received. Then where did the money go? Josephine reached the final column. There, beside the largest payment, stood Adrian's personal seal. Before she could answer, something struck the bedroom window. A stone shattered the glass and rolled across the carpet, wrapped in a blood-stained handkerchief. Mrs. Bell recoiled. Josephine removed the cloth. Around the stone was a message written in Thomas's hand. I am alive. Trust no one in the house. The dead man has your husband's signet ring. From the corridor came the slow turn of a key. Someone was unlocking the door. Mrs. Bell snatched the tracing paper from Josephine's hand and pushed it behind the loose brick. Josephine wrapped Thomas's message around the stone and dropped both beneath the folds of the window curtain just as the bedroom door opened. Adrian entered with Dr. Henry Caldwell, the Ashbourne family physician. Josephine's eyes went to the initials on Thomas's figures, HC. Dr. Caldwell carried a black leather case. His gray hair was perfectly arranged despite the hour, and the expression he offered Josephine contained the solemn compassion of a man preparing to injure someone for her own good. Why is the window broken? Adrian asked. A branch struck it, Mrs. Bell replied. There is no tree on this side of the house. The housekeeper lowered her head. Adrian looked at Josephine. The magistrate will arrive after sunrise. Until then, Dr. Caldwell has agreed to remain with you. I require neither a physician nor a jailer. Caldwell set his case upon the dressing table. His Grace is concerned that tonight's distress has affected your judgment. My judgment identified an unsafe bridge, a false inspection order, and an attempt to destroy evidence. The physician opened his case and removed a small brown bottle. Josephine recognized the bitter scent before he poured it. Laudanum. What have you told him? She asked Adrian. That you entered the bridge carrying a key to the explosives cabinet. That Thomas Reed was found dead. That you may have endangered yourself and others. Thomas is alive. Silence followed. Caldwell stopped pouring. Adrian's eyes sharpened. How could you know that? Josephine had spoken too quickly, but retreat would only reveal more. Because I saw him near the bridge. I saw him as well, Adrian said. Malcolm claims that must have been the dead man wearing Reed's coat. And you accepted that explanation? The body's face was damaged. Conveniently, Dr. Caldwell offered her the glass. Drink this, Your Grace. Josephine did not take it. What did Malcolm Vale pay you for? The physician's hand stiffened. HC, she continued. Your initials appear beside several railway payments. 6,000 tons of iron were purchased but never delivered. Did you certify injured workers as fit after the false steel began failing, or were you paid for another service? Adrian turned toward Caldwell. What is she talking about? A delusion produced by exhaustion, the doctor replied. Her Grace has slept very little. Josephine struck the glass from his hand. It shattered against the hearth. Caldwell lunged for her arm, but Mrs. Bell stepped between them. You will not touch her. You forget your position, Adrian said. No, Your Grace. The housekeeper's voice trembled, though she did not move. I remember precisely whom I serve. Adrian's face hardened. Leave us. Mrs. Bell looked at Josephine. A silent question passed between them. Go, Josephine answered with the smallest nod. The housekeeper curtsied and departed. Caldwell took another bottle from his case, but Adrian closed the lid before he could reach for a syringe. Wait outside, the Duke ordered. Your Grace, she may become violent. My wife has never been violent. Josephine almost laughed at the absurd tenderness of that defense after everything else he had believed. Caldwell left reluctantly. Adrian locked the door behind him, then faced her. Show me the railway figures. I do not have them. You just described them. I remembered the numbers before the document was taken. By whom? She said nothing. Adrian approached the broken window. Moonlight silvered the blood at his temple. For a moment he resembled the younger man who had once climbed scaffolding beside her, careless of rank and terrified only that she might fall. Josephine, if Thomas Reed is alive, someone placed another body at the ironworks. Yes. And if the payments exist, Vale has stolen from the railway. Yes. Then tell me where the evidence is. So you can hand it to him as you handed him my workshop? His jaw tightened. I am trying to understand. No, you are trying to decide which account costs you less. That is unfair. You confined me, allowed your guards to search me, and invited a physician to drug me, because Malcolm gave you a story that preserved your pride. Fairness left this house before I did. A shout rose from the courtyard. Adrian crossed to the window. Below, lamps moved rapidly toward the northern drive. A rider had arrived at full speed. A footman knocked on the bedroom door. Your Grace, the magistrate is here. Sir Malcolm requests you immediately. Adrian hesitated. Josephine saw the choice before him. He could remain, search for the truth, and protect her from the men who had already forged evidence against her. Or he could return to the public role Malcolm had constructed for him, the betrayed husband, the injured duke, the owner of a railway threatened by his unstable wife. He unlocked the door. Do not force me to regret leaving you unrestrained, he said. You began regretting me the moment my work became greater than your name. Pain flickered across his face, but he left. The instant the lock turned, Josephine retrieved Thomas's message and the tracing paper. Mrs. Bell had added something behind the brick, a narrow servant's key. Josephine changed into a maid's dark wool dress and entered the hidden passage behind the wardrobe. The corridor descended between the walls, carrying voices from the rooms below. Near Adrian's study, she heard Malcolm speaking to Magistrate Harcourt. The Duchess must be charged before noon, Malcolm said. Once she is formally accused, no committee will accept her testimony. And Ashbourne? Harcourt asked. He will sign whatever protects his title. Josephine crouched beside the ventilation grill. Through it, she saw a covered body lying across Adrian's desk. Malcolm pulled back the sheet. The dead man was not Thomas. It was the Eastern watchman from the bridge. On his finger gleamed Adrian's ducal signet ring. Harcourt leaned closer. How do you intend to explain that? Malcolm smiled and removed a blood-stained hammer from beneath the sheet. We will not explain it. The Duchess will. Then he turned toward the wall behind which Josephine was hiding. Unless, of course, she is listening now. Josephine remained perfectly still. On the other side of the wall, Malcolm crossed the study. His footsteps stopped directly before the ventilation grill. Harcourt gave a nervous laugh. No one could hear us through solid paneling. The Ashbourne house is full of passages, Malcolm replied. The late Duke used them to visit actresses without disturbing his wife. The grill shifted beneath his fingers. Josephine backed away, just as Malcolm tore it from the wall. His hand reached through the opening and closed on empty darkness. She was here, he said. Josephine gathered her skirt and ran. The passage narrowed sharply beyond Adrian's study. Dust filled her mouth, and exposed nails caught at the maid's dress. Behind her, wood splintered as Malcolm forced open the hidden panel. Seal the northern staircase, he shouted. She has escaped her apartments. Josephine knew the servants' corridors better than Malcolm, but he controlled the house below. Bells rang in the kitchens, doors slammed. Footmen hurried through the main halls while the passage filled with approaching lantern light from both directions. She reached the old nursery chimney and pulled a rusted lever concealed behind a beam. A panel opened at floor level. Josephine dropped to her knees and crawled into a disused laundry chute moments before two servants rushed past. The chute descended almost vertically. She braced her boots against the sides, but rotten wood broke beneath her weight. She fell through darkness and landed among baskets of linen in the basement laundry. Pain shot through her shoulder. She bit back a cry and forced herself upright. Mrs. Bell waited beside the outer door with a hooded cloak. You knew where I would come out. I have managed this house for 22 years. She placed the cloak around Josephine's shoulders. The stable boy has left a mare beyond the kitchen garden. Come with me. Malcolm knows you helped. My absence would confirm it. I can delay them. Josephine caught the older woman's hands. He may hurt you. Then make certain it costs him. Mrs. Bell opened the door. Cold air struck Josephine's face. She crossed the dark garden, climbed the eastern wall, and found a saddled gray mare hidden among the yew trees. Behind her, Adrian's voice rose from the portico. Josephine. She looked back once. He stood beneath the lamps without a coat, blood still dark upon his temple. Malcolm emerged behind him and pointed toward the garden. Josephine mounted and rode. St. Agnes School stood 4 miles from Ashbourne Hall, built on land she had purchased with the last money her father left solely in her name. The school's 40 pupils had been invited onto the inaugural train as a public demonstration of the Duke's generosity. Now Josephine understood that their presence served another purpose. Dead ministers might be called a political tragedy, dead children would become a national horror, and the woman accused of causing it would be remembered as a monster. A lantern flashed twice from the ruined mill beside the school. Josephine left the mare among the trees and entered through a broken doorway. Thomas Reed stood inside, one sleeve torn and his head wrapped in a stained bandage. She crossed the room and struck him across the face. Thomas staggered. "Your Grace, that is for throwing a stone through my window after warning me to trust no one in the house. I could not approach openly. You allowed me to believe you had been murdered. I heard Vale's men say they had found a body. I feared they meant to make it mine." Her anger weakened when she saw the blood soaking through his bandage. "Sit down." Thomas obeyed. Josephine examined the wound. It was deep but clean, likely made by the edge of a shovel rather than the face of a hammer. "The Eastern Watchman is dead," she said. "He was wearing Adrian's signet ring." Thomas looked up sharply. His Grace gave that ring to Sir Malcolm 3 weeks ago. Why? To authorize shipments while the Duke was in London. Another decision. Another piece of authority Adrian had placed into Malcolm's hands, because examining the railway himself would have required admitting Josephine's expertise. Thomas opened a wooden case. Inside lay a twisted rivet, 3 delivery ledgers, and a small steel plate stamped with a foreign manufacturer's mark. "The iron listed in those payments never reached Ashbourne," he said. "Vale sold most of it abroad and bought brittle scrap in its place. Dr. Caldwell falsified the workers' injury reports. Magistrate Harcourt approved the dead watchman's identity without an inquiry. And Adrian's seal? Every payment required it." Josephine searched the figures. "Did my husband know the shipments were false? I cannot prove that he did, but he signed them. Yes." She turned to the final page and found a contract dated 8 months earlier. Adrian had granted Malcolm full purchasing authority in exchange for financing the opening ceremony. In the margin, beside Josephine's written warning that the supplier lacked a foundry, Adrian had written 2 words: overruled. Ashbourne. He had been given the opportunity to investigate. He had chosen speed, praise, and power instead. Thomas removed a folded passenger list from the case. There is something worse. Every cabinet minister who had challenged Malcolm's proposed Northern mining bill would be aboard the train. So would Lord Edwin Mercer, the only committee member who knew Josephine had designed the railway. "This is not only fraud," she said. "The collapse will remove his political enemies. And once the passengers are dead, Vale intends to purchase the ruined railway through another company." Hooves thundered outside. Thomas extinguished the lantern. Through a crack in the mill wall, Josephine saw 6 riders surround the school. Adrian dismounted first. Malcolm rode beside him. A 3rd carriage stopped at the gate, bearing the insignia of the county constabulary. Thomas reached for the ledgers, but Josephine placed a hand over his. "If we run, they will hunt us. If they take the evidence, we lose everything. What do we do?" Josephine looked toward the school bell, its rope descending through the rafters. "We give them too many witnesses to silence." She seized the rope and rang. Lights appeared in the school windows. Teachers hurried into the yard, followed by 40 frightened children in their nightclothes. Villagers emerged from nearby cottages carrying lanterns. Josephine stepped outside with the ledgers held against her chest. Adrian approached through the gathering crowd. "Come away from the children. They are the reason I am here." Malcolm handed Magistrate Harcourt a signed warrant. Josephine expected to see her own name. Instead, the magistrate read aloud, "Adrian James Ashbourne, Duke of Ashbourne, you are under arrest for the murder of Samuel Pike and conspiracy to destroy the Western Railway Bridge." Adrian turned toward Malcolm in disbelief. Malcolm smiled. Then every constable raised his weapon at the Duke. Adrian did not resist when the constables closed around him. His gaze remained fixed on Malcolm. "You used my signet. I exercised the authority you gave me," Malcolm replied, "to manage shipments, not to place my ring on a dead man." Magistrate Harcourt raised the warrant. "The victim was found inside your study, Your Grace. Your ring was on his hand, and the murder weapon bears traces of blood matching the wound." Josephine knew the blood could not have been examined so quickly. Harcourt was reciting conclusions prepared before the body had even reached Ashbourne Hall. "The body was moved," she said. "Samuel Pike died elsewhere." Harcourt turned toward her. "And what knowledge do you possess of the crime, Your Grace?" "Enough to know that you were discussing how to blame me before my husband arrived at the school." Murmurs moved through the villagers. Malcolm's smile disappeared. "She is attempting to implicate everyone because her own scheme has failed." Josephine lifted the ledgers. "These record payments for iron that was never delivered. Sir Malcolm sold the proper materials and replaced them with scrap. Dr. Caldwell concealed the injuries caused by their failure." "Give them to me," Harcourt ordered. "No. You are withholding evidence from a magistrate. I am protecting evidence from your accomplice." Two constables advanced. The school children drew closer to their teachers, frightened by the weapons. Josephine did not step back. Adrian spoke from between the guards. "Harcourt, if you touch my wife, you no longer command anyone here," Malcolm said. The cruelty of the words struck Adrian with visible force. For years, he had believed authority belonged naturally to him. He had given Malcolm access to the railway, the Ashbourne seal, and the workers who once answered to Josephine. Now that borrowed authority had turned against him, Josephine held one ledger out to Headmistress Anne Whitmore. "Read the first entry aloud." Anne opened it beneath a lantern. "March 14th, payment of £22,000 to Vale Industrial Supply for 800 tons of bridge iron." Thomas placed the stamped steel plate beside the entry. Only 200 tons arrived. The remainder came from condemned ships purchased as scrap. A railway worker stepped from the crowd. That mark was on the beam that crushed Daniel Foster's leg. Another man raised his voice. "Dr. Caldwell told us the beam failed because Foster was drunk." "He never drank," a woman cried. "He was my brother." The murmuring became anger. Harcourt reached for the ledger, but Anne closed it against her chest. Several villagers moved around her. Malcolm glanced toward the armed constables. "Disperse this crowd." No one obeyed immediately. Josephine saw uncertainty pass across the face of the youngest constable. These were local men. Their children attended St. Agnes. They might arrest a duke under formal orders, but firing upon their own neighbors was another matter. Harcourt pointed at Thomas. "That man is wanted for questioning in Samuel Pike's murder." "I saw Pike alive after Thomas left the railway," Josephine said. "Can you prove it?" "Mrs. Bell can." Malcolm's expression revealed the mistake before his words did. "Mrs. Bell is unavailable." Josephine's stomach tightened. "What have you done to her?" "She suffered an unfortunate fall while attempting to prevent your escape." Adrian stepped forward so violently that two constables struggled to restrain him. "If she is harmed," Malcolm struck him across the face with the ivory handle of his cane. The villagers fell silent. A thin line of blood appeared at Adrian's mouth. He stared at Malcolm, stunned less by the pain than by the realization that the man he had elevated above his wife no longer needed to pretend respect. "Take him away," Malcolm ordered. The constables led Adrian toward the prison carriage. As he passed Josephine, he lowered his voice. "My study safe. The combination is the date your father's bridge opened." She looked at him sharply. "There are letters from Vale," he continued. "I kept them in case he challenged my ownership." Even now, his instinct was not confession but self-protection. Yet those letters might contain the proof she needed. "Why did you not show them to me?" she asked. His gaze dropped. "Because they mention who designed the railway." The carriage door closed between them. Harcourt addressed Josephine. "You will surrender the ledgers and accompany us." "On what charge?" "Obstructing an investigation." Headmistress Whitmore stepped beside her. "Then you must arrest all of us." One by one, the villagers formed a line between Josephine and the constables. Malcolm studied the crowd, then smiled as though conceding a minor game. "Keep your ledgers, Duchess. In 12 days, they may interest a committee." Josephine heard the hidden meaning. "You will not open that bridge. I no longer require 12 days." He removed a telegram from his coat and passed it to her. The railway committee had approved an emergency change of schedule. The inaugural journey would depart at noon the following day, supposedly to prevent further sabotage. The ministers and investors had already begun arriving at Ashbourne station. Josephine read the final line twice. All 40 pupils of St. Agnes were still listed as passengers. Malcolm leaned closer. "If the children fail to appear, the world will assume their headmistress shares your guilt." He turned to leave, then paused beside Thomas. "And if you attempt to remove a single rivet from my bridge, Mrs. Bell will not survive her next fall." The riders departed, with Adrian imprisoned among them. Josephine looked at the school clock. It was 4 in the morning. She had 8 hours to expose Malcolm, rescue Mrs. Bell, and prevent a train from carrying hundreds of people onto a bridge designed to collapse. Then the western horizon flashed orange. Thomas ran to the mill door. Beyond the village, Ashbourne Hall was burning, and the fire had begun in Adrian's study, the room containing Malcolm's letters. "Take the ledgers to Lord Mercer," Josephine told Thomas. "He is lodging at the railway hotel beside the station. Do not give them to anyone else. You cannot go to the hall alone. Mrs. Bell may be inside. And the letters? If they survived, I will bring them." Headmistress Whitmore approached, still holding the first ledger. "What about the children?" "Keep them here. Lock every door and place villagers at each entrance. No railway official is to take them anywhere, regardless of what document he carries." Anne nodded. "And if constables return? Ring the bell until the entire county hears you." Josephine mounted the gray mare and rode toward the flames. By the time she reached Ashbourne Hall, fire had consumed the east wing roof. Servants formed a chain from the ornamental lake, passing buckets toward the entrance, while smoke poured from shattered windows. No one appeared to command them. "Where is Mrs. Bell?" Josephine asked a footman. "We thought she escaped with you, Your Grace." "She did not." Josephine wrapped a wet cloth around her mouth and entered before anyone could stop her. Heat struck like an opened furnace. Burning plaster fell from the ceiling, and the carpet smoldered beneath her boots. The fire had begun in Adrian's study, but spread unnaturally fast along the east corridor. Someone had soaked the paneling with lamp oil. She reached the servants' staircase and found Mrs. Bell lying behind the pantry door. The housekeeper was breathing, but only faintly. An empty laudanum bottle lay beside her hand. Josephine dragged her toward the courtyard. Twice, flames forced them back. At the central hall, part of the ceiling collapsed, sending sparks across the marble. Josephine shielded Mrs. Bell with her body until 2 footmen saw them through the smoke and rushed forward. Once outside, she knelt beside the housekeeper. Mrs. Bell's eyelids fluttered. "Caldwell, he drugged you? Made me drink it. Asked where you hid the papers. Rest now. The safe." Mrs. Bell caught Josephine's sleeve. "His Grace had it moved last month, not in the study." "Where?" "The old conservatory floor." Josephine left Mrs. Bell with the servants and ran around the burning east wing. The conservatory had been abandoned after a winter storm shattered its glass roof. Ivy covered the stone walls, and dead leaves filled the empty flower beds. Beneath the remains of a marble planter, Josephine found an iron plate set into the floor. She turned the dial to the date her father's bridge opened, 17 April 1837. The lock released. Inside were letters, railway contracts, patent records, and a leather notebook bearing Malcolm's initials. Adrian had not kept them to expose fraud. He had gathered proof of their bargain. Josephine opened the first letter. Your Grace, the Duchess's insistence upon costly specifications threatens both the opening date and your authority. Remove her, and I will ensure Parliament recognizes the railway as yours alone. Adrian's reply was clipped. Proceed. Her name must not appear in any official record. A second letter warned that the replacement iron had not completed load testing. Adrian had written, the ceremony cannot be delayed. Use it. Vale assures me the risk is negligible. Josephine closed her eyes. He had not planned the murders, but he had known the material was untested. He had gambled with workers' lives to protect his reputation. Malcolm's plot had grown inside the authority Adrian willingly gave him. The leather notebook contained payments to Caldwell and Harcourt, purchases of condemned iron, and insurance policies on the railway. Yet the final page had been torn out. Josephine searched the safe and found a narrow envelope beneath the patent records. It contained her original bridge designs, each one signed by her and witnessed by her father's former solicitor. Adrian had preserved proof that she was the true engineer, while publicly calling her a liar. Smoke rolled into the conservatory. Josephine gathered the documents inside her cloak and closed the safe. As she rose, Dr. Caldwell stepped through the broken doorway holding a revolver. You should have taken the laudanum, he said. You should have left the county. I will, once the train departs. Malcolm intends to kill you too. Everyone who knows the scheme becomes evidence. Caldwell's eyes shifted. Josephine saw fear and pressed it. Why was the charge inside the tunnel triggered while Adrian and I were there? Malcolm knew you had inspected that mechanism. When the bridge falls, whose name do you think Harcourt will place on the explosives order? He promised me passage to France. He promised my husband ownership of the railway. Caldwell's revolver lowered by an inch. A gunshot cracked behind him. He jerked forward and collapsed among the dead vines. Malcolm stood in the doorway, smoke curling around his shoulders. He stepped over Caldwell's body and aimed a second pistol at Josephine. Give me the documents. She backed toward the shattered outer wall. Beyond it lay a 20-foot drop into the dry fountain court. You cannot destroy every copy. I do not need to. By noon, the bridge collapse will prove your design was defective. And the children, necessary witnesses, become memorable victims. Josephine threw the leather notebook into the burning corridor. Malcolm turned instinctively. She leapt through the broken wall. Her cloak caught on an iron trellis, tearing the documents from her arms as she fell. Josephine struck the fountain basin, and pain exploded through her left ankle. Above her, Malcolm appeared at the opening. Most of the papers fluttered into the flames behind him, but one envelope had fallen beside Josephine, the envelope containing her original designs. Then, the great bell at St. Agnes began ringing. Once, twice, again, and again. A rider raced into the courtyard shouting, "The children are gone!" Railway carriages took them through the northern gate. In the distance, a locomotive whistle screamed. It was only 7 in the morning. Malcolm had moved the departure forward again. Josephine forced herself upright against the fountain rim. Her left ankle would not bear her weight. Above her, Malcolm disappeared from the shattered opening, unwilling to remain once servants began rushing toward the courtyard. Josephine folded the surviving envelope beneath her bodice and dragged herself toward the stone steps. A stable boy reached her first. "Bring the light mail cart," she ordered, "and find Mrs. Bell." Within minutes, 2 footmen carried the housekeeper into the cart beside her. Mrs. Bell was barely conscious, but her breathing had strengthened. Josephine took the reins herself. The road to Ashbourne station followed the railway for nearly 3 miles. Smoke from the hall drifted across the fields behind them. Ahead, the locomotive whistle sounded again. Not the long note of departure, but 3 short blasts ordering passengers to board. They still had time. At the village crossing, Thomas ran into the road and seized the horse's bridle. "Lord Mercer has the ledgers," he said. He sent a telegram to London requesting parliamentary officers, but Vale's men cut the telegraph wire before he received confirmation. The children? Taken under Harcourt's written order. He told the headmistress they were being placed in protective custody. Josephine looked toward the station clock tower rising beyond the trees. "Where is Adrian?" "In the detention coach attached to the rear of the inaugural train. Harcourt claims he will be transported to the county prison after the ceremony." Malcolm intended the Duke to die on the bridge beside everyone else. Adrian's death would close every question concerning the forged orders, the missing iron, and Malcolm's use of the Ashbourne seal. "Get in," Josephine said. The station forecourt was already crowded when they arrived. Ministers, investors, journalists, and local families filled the platforms beneath flags bearing the Ashbourne crest. A brass band played beside the ticket hall. No sign of the fire had yet reached the guests. At the center of the platform stood Malcolm, welcoming passengers as though he owned the railway. The 40 pupils of St. Agnes had been placed inside the third carriage. Constables guarded both doors. Josephine stopped the cart before the main entrance. When she tried to step down, pain drove through her ankle and nearly brought her to her knees. Thomas offered his arm. "I can walk. You can barely stand. Then help me stand where they can see me." She entered the station leaning on him. Conversations died as guests recognized the soot-blackened woman in a servant's dress. Reporters hurried forward. Malcolm descended from the platform. "The Duchess has escaped lawful confinement," he announced. "Keep her away from the train." Josephine removed the envelope from her bodice and held up the original designs. "My name appears on every calculation," she said. "These drawings were witnessed before the railway patents were registered. The Duke concealed my authorship, and Sir Malcolm replaced the iron I specified with condemned scrap." The nearest reporters began writing. Malcolm pointed toward the constables. "Arrest her." Lord Mercer stepped between them, holding one of Thomas's ledgers. "Not until she has addressed the railway committee. You have no authority here. I sit on that committee. You sit on it for another 11 days. Mercer's face changed. He had now understood why his name appeared on the passenger list. Josephine climbed onto a luggage cart so the crowd could see her. "The Western Bridge is unsafe," she called. "If this train departs, it will not reach the opposite bank." Fear moved across the platform. Malcolm raised Adrian's signed authorization. The Duchess approved the removal of the defective braces herself. When her error was discovered, she attempted to destroy the bridge and blame the railway's directors. That document is forged. It bears her handwriting. It describes the braces as ornamental lattice supports. I have never used that phrase in any technical drawing because latticework is structural. The forger copied the language from Sir Malcolm's revised contract. A reporter snatched a copy of the contract from a clerk and compared the wording. More pens began scratching across paper. For the first time, Malcolm looked uncertain. Then Magistrate Harcourt emerged from the ticket hall with a pistol pressed against Anne Whitmore's back. "The train leaves now," he said. Constables forced the ministers into their carriages. Several attempted to resist, but Harcourt threatened the headmistress, while Malcolm's guards sealed the platform gates. Josephine searched the locomotive, the rails, and the signal box. The engine stood on the southern departure line. To reach the Western Bridge, it had to pass the freight junction half a mile ahead. Josephine had designed that junction with a manual switching lever in case the signal mechanism failed. "If we reach the freight yard first," she whispered to Thomas, "we can divert the train onto the quarry siding. That track ends at the old buffers. It is uphill. The engine will lose speed before reaching them." "And if Vale's men guard the lever?" Josephine looked toward a small maintenance locomotive waiting on the adjacent track. Its firebox was lit, and no driver stood nearby. "Then we arrive before they do." Thomas helped her down from the cart. Lord Mercer climbed into the maintenance engine while Josephine took the controls. She released the brake, opened the regulator, and sent the little locomotive lurching forward. Malcolm saw them. "Stop that engine!" Gunfire struck the metal cab. Thomas shoveled coal, while Mercer crouched behind the boiler. Josephine drove through the station gates as the inaugural train began moving on the parallel line. The smaller engine was faster at first. It pulled ahead by 50 yards, then 100. The freight junction appeared beyond the curve. A railway worker stood beside the switching lever. Josephine recognized him as one of the men who had scraped her initials from the bridge cornerstone. He raised a red flag. Then he drew an axe and brought it down upon the switching mechanism. The lever broke from its housing. "We cannot divert them now," Thomas shouted. Josephine shut the regulator and applied the brake. Sparks tore beneath the wheels as the maintenance locomotive stopped beside the ruined junction. The inaugural train thundered past them. Through the third carriage window, terrified children pressed their hands against the glass. In the final detention coach, Adrian gripped the bars and stared at Josephine. The Western Bridge lay 6 miles ahead. Thomas examined the severed mechanism. "It will take an hour to repair. We have less than 10 minutes. Lord Mercer looked toward the abandoned quarry line. "Is there another way to stop the train?" Josephine watched the black smoke receding toward the valley. Then she remembered the one feature Malcolm could not have removed because it had been built beneath the rails. "The bridge sings under strain," she said, "but before it sings, it listens." Thomas stared at her. Josephine pointed toward the quarry's blasting shed. "Bring me every coil of copper wire you can find." The system had been Josephine's first safeguard and Adrian's favorite object of ridicule. Beneath the Western Bridge, a tension rod connected the central span to an electrical contact. If the iron stretched beyond its safe limit, the contact completed a circuit, rang an alarm at the bridge house, and lowered a red semaphore on both approaches. A second mechanism released a heavy counterweight, shifting the western points toward a maintenance siding before a train could enter the bridge. Malcolm had removed the alarm bell from official plans, but he had never found the buried line. Thomas returned from the blasting shed carrying copper wire, a portable battery, and 2 insulated clamps. Josephine opened the signal cabinet beside the ruined junction. The internal wire had been cut cleanly. "He knew about the circuit," Thomas said. "He knew about the alarm, not the counterweight." She joined the quarry wire to the buried conductor, then connected the other end to the battery. A blue spark snapped between the terminals. Far down the valley, a red semaphore dropped across the track. "It worked," Lord Mercer said. Josephine kept watching. A black dot appeared beside the western approach. The counterweight had released, moving the points toward the maintenance siding. The train should slow when the driver saw the signal. Even if he did not, the switched points would carry it away from the bridge. Instead, the locomotive accelerated. "Vale has replaced the driver," Thomas said. The train vanished behind a line of trees. Seconds later, a distant metallic crash echoed across the valley. Josephine's stomach dropped. The maintenance points had not moved. Someone had chained them in place. "We need the engine," she said. The small locomotive could not match the inaugural train on level track, but the quarry line descended sharply through the hills and rejoined the railway near the Western Bridge. It was a dangerous route built for stone wagons, with curves too narrow for passenger service. It was also their only chance. Thomas helped Josephine into the cab. Lord Mercer stayed at the junction with the ledgers, promising to gather every reporter and railway officer he could find. Josephine opened the regulator fully. The maintenance engine plunged onto the quarry line. Trees blurred past the cab. The wheels screamed around the first curve, throwing Thomas against the coal bunker. Josephine's injured ankle throbbed beneath her, but she kept one foot pressed against the control platform. "Too fast!" Thomas shouted. "Not fast enough." The line descended through a rock cutting and emerged above the river. On the main track below, the inaugural train raced toward the bridge. Less than a mile separated it from the western approach. The quarry track crossed over the main line before merging beside the bridge house. Josephine drove down the slope, steam billowing behind them. At the final curve, the maintenance engine drew level with the detention coach. Adrian saw her through the bars. Josephine pointed toward the brake lever mounted inside his coach. He shook his head and raised his bound wrists. Harcourt had chained him to the wall. Thomas climbed onto the side step. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Getting aboard. You will be killed. So will everyone else." He leapt. For one terrible second, he hung between the two trains. Then he caught the detention coach railing and pulled himself onto the rear platform. Josephine drove harder. The quarry track merged with the main line 200 yards ahead. If she remained on it, the maintenance engine would collide with the passenger train. She waited until the last possible moment, then locked the brake. The little engine shuddered violently. Thomas's train surged past as Josephine's wheels threw sparks across the rails. She jumped from the cab. Her hands caught the railing of the second-class carriage. Pain tore through her injured ankle when it struck the step, but a passenger seized her arms and dragged her inside. The carriage was filled with journalists. "Pull the emergency cord," she shouted. A reporter reached for it, but the cord hung severed from the ceiling. Malcolm had disabled the carriage brakes. Josephine moved forward through the train. Each coach was packed with people who had only now begun to understand that they were prisoners. Doors had been locked from the outside. She used a reporter's metal pen to force the internal catches open. In the third carriage, the children of St. Agnes huddled between the seats. Anne Whitmore stood before them with blood on her temple. "Where is Harcourt?" Josephine asked. "With Malcolm in the engine." Josephine looked through the forward window. The red semaphore stood ahead. Beyond it waited the western bridge. The train passed the signal without slowing. Josephine climbed onto the roof. Wind tore at her dress as she crawled toward the locomotive. Below, the river flashed between the trees. The bridge cables rose ahead like black ribs against the morning sky. A gunshot struck the roof beside her hand. Malcolm leaned from the locomotive tender with a pistol. "You should have stayed beneath my bridge," he shouted. Josephine flattened herself as he fired again. The bullet shattered a roof lamp. Glass swept backward in the wind. Thomas emerged from the detention coach and climbed onto the rear roof. Adrian followed, one wrist still locked inside a broken chain. Together, they moved forward. Malcolm saw them and fired. Thomas fell against the roof but did not slide. Adrian caught his coat and dragged him behind a ventilation housing. Josephine reached the tender and dropped into the coal. Malcolm struck her injured ankle with his cane. She cried out and fell. He raised the pistol toward her face. Adrian jumped from the carriage roof and crashed into him. The two men struck the side of the locomotive. Malcolm's pistol flew into the river, but Harcourt emerged from the engine cab holding another weapon. Josephine grabbed a shovel and drove it into his knees. He collapsed across the footplate. She pulled herself toward the main brake lever. A chain had been wrapped around it and secured with Adrian's ducal padlock. "Your key!" she shouted. Adrian searched his pockets. Malcolm laughed as they reached the bridge. "Your servants took it when they arrested you." The first wheels struck the iron span. At once, Josephine heard the sound she had feared. The bridge began to sing. Not the deep, steady note of a structure carrying weight correctly, but a rising metallic scream. Rivets snapped beneath them. The western cables twisted, and the river appeared through widening gaps between the rails. Josephine swung the shovel at the chain. Once, twice. The lock cracked but did not open. Ahead, the central span dropped several inches. The locomotive tilted toward the river. Then Adrian closed both hands around the chain and looked at Josephine. How many seconds? She listened to the dying bridge. 30. Behind them were hundreds of passengers, 40 children, and every witness Malcolm had intended to bury beneath the Ashbourne name. "Do not break the chain," Josephine said. Adrian stared at her. "You said 30 seconds. If we stop the entire train here, its weight will hold the bridge down until the central span collapses." Another rivet snapped beneath the locomotive. Josephine looked backward. Only the engine, tender, and first two carriages had entered the bridge. The remaining coaches, including the carriage carrying the children, were still upon the western approach. "We separate the train," she said. "The engine and first two carriages continue across. Everything behind them must stop before reaching the central span." "The carriage brake cords were cut," Adrian said. "There are handbrakes on the front and rear platforms. Thomas knows where they are." She leaned from the tender and shouted the instructions. Thomas immediately crawled toward the coupling behind the second carriage. Adrian followed, dragging the broken length of chain from his wrist. Malcolm understood before Harcourt did. "If they separate the coaches, there will be survivors," he said. "Exactly," Josephine replied. Harcourt raised his pistol. She swung the shovel into his wrist. The shot passed through the cab roof, and the weapon fell between the wheels. Harcourt lunged at her, but she drove her shoulder into his chest. He struck the boiler controls and collapsed, stunned, across the footplate. Malcolm seized Josephine by the hair. "You should have remained invisible," he hissed. "That was Adrian's demand. You merely profited from it." She drove the heel of her uninjured foot into his knee. Malcolm released her with a cry. Josephine reached the regulator and opened it fully. The locomotive surged forward. Its sudden pull loosened the coupling Thomas was fighting to release. He lifted the pin, but the iron refused to clear its housing. Adrian wrapped his broken chain around the pin. "Move," he shouted. Thomas rolled aside. Adrian braced both feet against the carriage wall and pulled. The chain cut through his palms. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the coupling pin tore free. The locomotive and first two carriages raced ahead. Behind them, Thomas turned the first handbrake while Adrian climbed across the remaining coaches, ordering passengers to turn every brake wheel they could reach. Metal screamed along the western approach. The third carriage stopped with its front wheels inches from the fractured bridge joint. Inside, 40 children clung to one another as the central span dropped away before them. Josephine's section of the train still had to reach the eastern bank. The locomotive crossed the weakened center. The bridge bent beneath it, and the left rail separated from its fastenings. Josephine closed the regulator halfway, balancing speed against vibration. Too fast, and the cables would tear. Too slow, and the bridge would hold them long enough to fall. She listened to the iron. The terrible scream lowered into a pulsing rhythm. 3 seconds between each failure, she said. No one understood her except Thomas, watching helplessly from the severed train behind. Josephine opened the regulator at the end of the second pulse. The locomotive leapt forward just before the next section dropped. The tender struck the damaged rail, lifted onto 2 wheels, then crashed back into place. The first carriage followed. The second swayed so violently that its windows shattered over the river. Malcolm crawled toward the side step. Josephine caught his coat. "You wanted witnesses beneath the bridge. You will remain with them above it." He struck her injured ankle. Her hand opened, and Malcolm jumped. He landed on a maintenance platform below the eastern pier, breaking his leg but escaping the river. Railway workers who had followed along the bank reached him before he could crawl away. The locomotive cleared the final arch. Josephine applied the brake. Behind them, the western bridge gave one last mournful note. The central span folded into the river, carrying the empty rails down in a cloud of spray and twisted iron. The children were alive. So were the ministers, journalists, and workers Malcolm had intended to kill. Harcourt was pulled from the engine in irons. Malcolm was carried from the riverbank beneath the gaze of reporters who had heard his final threats. Thomas delivered the railway ledgers to Lord Mercer. Anne Whitmore testified that Harcourt had kidnapped the children under a fraudulent order. Mrs. Bell survived and identified Dr. Caldwell as the man who drugged her and set the fire. Samuel Pike's blood was found inside Malcolm's carriage, along with the missing page from his notebook. It contained payments to Harcourt, Caldwell, and the men ordered to remove the bridge braces. The explosives key planted in Josephine's cloak had been cut by the same locksmith who produced 6 duplicate Ashbourne keys for Malcolm. The conspiracy had begun as theft. Malcolm sold the railway's proper iron abroad, purchased condemned scrap, and bribed Caldwell to conceal the resulting injuries. When Lord Mercer prepared to challenge both the railway accounts and Malcolm's mining bill, Malcolm turned fraud into murder. He arranged the inaugural journey to eliminate his political enemies, destroy the defective bridge, collect the insurance money, and purchase the bankrupt railway through a hidden company. Josephine had been selected as the scapegoat because Adrian had already taught the world to distrust her. He had erased her name, publicly called her jealous, surrendered his seal, ignored her warnings, approved untested iron, and allowed Malcolm to remove every engineer loyal to her. Malcolm had forged the final orders, but Adrian had created the conditions that made the forgery believable 3 weeks later. The Parliamentary Railway Commission assembled at Ashbourne Station. Josephine entered using a cane. Behind her stood Thomas, Mrs. Bell, the teachers of St. Agnes, and dozens of injured railway workers. Her original drawings covered the committee table. Each bore her signature and the date of its creation. Adrian waited before the same silver dedication plaque from which her name had been removed. He had not been charged with murder. The evidence proved Malcolm had used his seal and planted the body. But Adrian still faced civil claims, parliamentary censure, and financial ruin for authorizing untested materials. Lord Mercer invited him to speak. Adrian faced the reporters and workers. "My wife designed the Ashbourne Railway," he said. "Every calculation attributed to me belonged to Josephine." Silence filled the station. "I concealed her authorship because I feared investors would respect her more than they respected me. When she warned me about the iron, I chose Malcolm Vale's assurances because they protected my ceremony, my appointment, and my pride. I dismissed her engineers, signed away her inheritance, confined her in our home, and permitted men to call her unstable when I knew she was the only person capable of judging the bridge." He looked at Josephine, but she offered him no rescue. "I did not plan the deaths," Adrian continued. "But my choices gave the man who did plan them the power to act. The public disgrace belongs to me. The achievement belongs to her." Before the commission, Adrian surrendered all railway patents, voting shares, and future profits to an independent trust controlled by Josephine. The trust would compensate injured workers, rebuild St. Agnes School, restore her father's ironworks to her ownership, and finance a new bridge under her authority. Malcolm Vale was convicted of murder, attempted mass murder, fraud, kidnapping, arson, and conspiracy. Magistrate Harcourt received a life sentence for corruption and attempted murder. Caldwell's estate was seized to compensate the workers whose injuries he had concealed. Every newspaper that had called Josephine unstable printed a formal correction, naming her as the railway's original engineer. Adrian resigned his parliamentary appointment and sold 2 Ashbourne estates to meet the workers' claims. He did not ask Josephine to forgive him during the hearing. Only after the station emptied did he approach her. "I kept your drawings because I could not bear to destroy proof of what you had done," he said. "But you could bear to destroy my name." Yes, the honesty arrived too late to heal what his pride had broken. "I thought if the world needed me to present your work, then some part of it still belonged to me," he said. "I understand now that I loved being necessary to you more than I loved seeing you free." Josephine rested both hands upon her cane. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing I have a right to request." For the first time in their marriage, he placed the choice entirely in her hands. Josephine chose separation. Adrian granted it without contest, provided her with an independent residence, and relinquished every claim to her patents, earnings, school, and ironworks. Whether he became a better man would be his work, not her reward. 1 year later, Josephine stood before a new bridge spanning the same river. It carried no ducal crest. Its dedication plaque read, "Designed by Josephine Ellis Ashbourne, built by the workers who survived." Thomas waited beside the first locomotive, now serving as chief engineer. 40 pupils from St. Agnes filled the forward carriage, each accompanied by a parent. Josephine placed one hand against the nearest cable. The bridge began to sing beneath the engine's weight. This time, the note was deep, steady, and true. She raised the green flag. The train crossed under her own name,